Hello again, and this is the Truth Seeker. This continues a series on the Council of the Gods. In this video, I will be beginning on the topic of the names of God. The first one being Elyon, or El, and the other one being Yahweh, quote-unquote Yahweh, which is actually the four-letter name of God in Hebrew, Yud-He-Vav-He. So, as we go along here, there's really no good place to start on this topic. So, rather than spending a great deal of time trying to put this in some orderly fashion, I figured the best way to do it is to just get this information out there as I study it, and while it's fresh in my mind. So this will be video 2.1 concerning Elyon and quote-unquote Yahweh. The key scripture of this series, of course, being, well, one of the key scriptures being Deuteronomy chapter 32, and then in this particular case, verse 8 and 9, when the Most High, that is Elyon, and if you look in the Hebrew Massoretic Text, you can see down here, let me increase the size, that this is the spelling. Ayin, Lamed, Yod, Vav, Nun. Or this is actually Cholam, where we're getting the O sound. So, Elyon. And one of the things that you'll note in the spelling of the name of Elyon is that it begins with the letter Ayin. And we do see, you know what, I will be doing maybe a little bit more investigation on this, but when we look at the name Elohim, we see that it is spelled with the Aleph, and that El, the name El, is spelled with, it starts with the Aleph in the Hebrew. In other words, in this case, this particular name is beginning with another character altogether, which is the character Ayin. Now, there are reasons for that, and right now I can only begin to guess what those reasons are. And I suppose a lot of other scholars speculate as to what those reasons are as well. One of the things is that it just simply was pronounced differently. And I'll be getting into that a little bit further down here. So in the text, the basic claim, which is made by most, is that Yahweh is actually the son of the Most High God Elyon. Okay. But from a conservative point of view, we're looking at these two names as just simply different names for the same Lord and God, for the same Most High God. And so that, I mean, in the most simplistic approach to this study would just be to say, look, they're not two different gods. They're just two different names for the same Lord and God. But seeing as how this has been looked at so much and scrutinized so much, we have to go through all of these questions and claims. So then it turns out being this massive study. But in the most simplistic reason to be given is that these two names are actually two different names for the same Lord and God Most High. So in the Revised Standard Version, the scripture reads, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he fixed the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance." And in this case, Lord's or Lord is the four-character name of God, Yod-He, Vav-He. And then we can get into later on the translation to sons of God, because as most of you know, if you've been studying this issue, in the Massoretic Text, Hebrew, it says sons of Israel, B'nai Yisrael. But of course, we've seen that the Septuagint, the Greek version of these scriptures, reference angels or sons of God. And we'll be getting into the variations of what some of the other scholars are saying about the differences between divine beings and angels, if there is a difference. So that's a whole nother area of speculation. But the Dead Sea Scrolls also translate this sons of God, and we can get into some other things about why the Massoretic Text translates this as sons of Israel. And lately I've been looking into the idea that these are terms that are similar, like to be a son of Israel is to be a son of God, kind of an idea, you know. So there's that possibility that this was carried over from a transliterated text or a Hebrew text that had been interpreted in a way to give a deeper meaning of sons of Israel, so that they were differentiating themselves, showing that the sons of God are the sons of Israel. So that's a possibility. The Massoretic Text is notorious. Well, I shouldn't say notorious. The translators, the compilers of the Massoretic Text were very forward about the fact that the text that they had received was not complete unity. And so in their compilations, they had, of course, favored those which were more in line with Rabbinic Judaism, or what was to become Rabbinic Judaism after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD or so. So the Massoretic Text has always been unfavorable to Christian readings, as far as that's concerned, because if the we can get into the reasons, but essentially those who were compiling all of the Hebrew text that they had at that time if they had a text that seemed to lean more toward a Christian interpretation, in most cases they went with another text that interpreted it more in line with what they felt was a Jewish interpretation. And so that's why when we look back at the Septuagint in Greek, we see the differences between the Massoretic text and the Greek text. And that's a whole nother area of study. But so let's just move on here. And there's this claim that Elyon and quote-unquote Yahweh, this is what the scholars call God, Yahweh, are two separate gods. Now, Elyon being the Most High God and Yahweh being one of the sons of the Most High God. Now, before I move on here, there's something I didn't put in my notes. And that is that in the Canaanite religion, El, or Il, is the highest god in that pantheon. Now, in Hebrew, El can mean God, or it can mean lowercase god, except in Hebrew, when you see Elyon, it's translated Most High. Okay, it's not. How could I say this? It's dissimilar to the Canaanite in the fact that in the Canaanite it's Il who's the highest god, but in Hebrew it's Elyon. Okay, so there's that variation there, if you want to call it a variation. Obviously, there are some similarities here that we need to decide how we're going to attribute those similarities, and that's what I'm going to be getting into. Now, there's three things that we definitely cannot really prove with surety in these claims. Number one, that Elyon is the same God as the Canaanite god El, or Il. In fact, in that scripture in Deuteronomy chapter 32, in the Massoretic Text, we don't see the term El. We do see Elyon as a complete name. So what we're dealing with, I guess, in this case is concepts of, okay, there's the Most High in Hebrew, and then there's the God who is the highest God in the Canaanite religion. And so there's this claim that, they're both the same God, or one derived from the other. Okay, but this, of course, is just speculation. Now, number two, there is a claim that Yahweh is the same God as the Canaanite god Baal. And then, so we'll get into that. We're not going to get into that in this video, but I'm sure we will touch on that issue. And number three, since Baal was the son of the Canaanite god El, or Il, then therefore Yahweh must be the son of Elyon. So that's one way that a lot of individuals are claiming that Yahweh is the son of Elyon. The other way, of course, is by reading the text of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8 and 9, as the names designating two different gods, when you can just as easily read it as the names attributed to the same Most High God. So we'll get into that as well. So now, there is something that I wanted to get into regarding the name El or Il, and that is what people are thinking when they claim that Elyon and El, or El in the Hebrew and Il in the Canaanite, are the same God. Do they think that those two are exactly the same God? Maybe some do, but I think the majority are smart enough to realize that that's not the case. I think the general idea is that there's a claim that Israel somehow evolved their ideas from the Canaanite religious quote-unquote foundation. So there's another issue, okay? And that's the issue of proving, not just putting similar things together and saying, see, look, it must be, that must be what happened. But instead, showing something to be a very, very likely case. Instead, what we get are a bunch of guesses and maybes and might have been, kind of ideas. So now, if we are going to be completely open to all the possibilities of what occurred throughout history in this particular scenario, we should also consider that the Canaanite religion sprung forth from earlier Hebraic religious thought. Now, this would have been sometime after the time of Abraham and prior to the time of Moses. That's one possibility. It's just a possibility. But the point is very simple, really, and basically, if there are similarities in both cultures, both religions, then we need to understand those similarities as being attributed by more than one factor. It can be seen from both ways. In other words, we don't just say that, oh, it was the Hebrews that evolved from the Canaanite culture. No, we would also have to consider the possibility that it was the Canaanites who basically evolved their ideas, or I shouldn't say evolved, but who developed their ideas from a Hebraic basic idea of monotheism, which then became polytheism. So now how would we consider this possibility? Well, seeing as how the Ugaritic texts, which are the Canaanite texts, seeing as how those are dated from around 1450 to 1200 BC, and traditional dates for Abraham are around 1800 BC, then we could speculate that the Hebrew thought of the early Semites influenced the Canaanite religion. And I have a link here. I think this is the date. Why don't we take a look at it and see what it is? Oh, it's not coming up. Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah. This is just a generic site on the Ugaritic, and so this is just giving some different dates on the Ugaritic. Let's see, where do we have here? Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, I'm not sure where I found that date, but that's a pretty good site. You could check that out. Anyway, this is a generic consensus date for the text of the Ugaritic. So, now, there is another possibility that can be speculated. And that was that Abraham was born into a pagan culture. He left that culture to establish monotheism. But the biblical records show that Semitic monotheism was practiced prior to Abraham. So, actually, this is, I shouldn't say, I should retype this here. So basically what I'm talking about are the earlier forms of Semitic monotheism influencing the Canaanite religion, but also influencing Hebraic thought. Now this, of course, is all speculation, but again, it's also speculation that Elyon and Yahweh are separate gods. So, the first website that I was looking at that was making this claim is a site called bewaredeception.com. It's a site that was created to promote biblical veganism. And so I find it very interesting that the author is caught up in the Council of the Gods ideas. But it mostly has to do with discrediting statements made by God Most High, that is Elyon, so as to lay the blame on Yahweh or other gods for allowing meat eating. Now, as a result of this line of reasoning, most of that website goes into a great deal of explanation regarding why God Most High or Elyon never said anyone could eat meat. Now, just for the record, I am not opposed to veganism, and in many ways I am looking to incorporate more fruits and veggies in my diet, but there are some things on this website that I need to address, and that is that the claim that Elyon and Yahweh are two separate gods needs to be scrutinized a little more here. So the article that I looked at, or that I continue to look at, is this one here. That's titled Yahweh was one of the sons of Elyon, or El Elyon. Basically, there's some various arguments to support veganism, but for the most part, the article accepts the claim that Yahweh is the son of Elyon, He does not go into too many arguments. He does go into a few arguments to try and logically prove that they are separate gods, but in general, these are all based upon singular interpretations of scriptures without consideration of alternative explanations. So I'm attempting to offer alternatives to some of his arguments, as I simply do not have time to cover his entire site. And but since I'm only focused on a few topics, I think that answering a handful of them should be sufficient. And my first question is, what does the author have to say about Elyon and the Canaanite god El or Il being the same god? Well, like I said, there's not much directly referenced aside from other secondary source material, which essentially makes the same claims without an explanation. If you guys are interested if you don't know what secondary source material is, primary source material, then turn off this video and go learn what that is. But seriously, I'm not trying to be rude or anything. I'm just saying. But the author himself, of that website, he primarily uses the Hebrew scriptures to prove the majority of his points. In other words, he's using the Bible, and he's using different verses to go through in a logical manner what he, according to his logic, basically. But as I stated, he is generally locked into singular interpretations without regard to other possibilities. Now, he does make various arguments which are clearly borrowed from other sources, but he does not consistently reference where this material originated from. Now, the result of that is that tends to weaken his overall presentation by casting doubt over his general conclusions. So clearly, this person who created this website, he is convinced that Israel's religion was tainted by the surrounding Canaanite culture, and that Elyon is nothing short of a developed idea of the Canaanite god El or Il. Now, one of the reasons most people are attracted to this idea, it initially has to do with the similarity in the sounding of the names Elyon and Il, or in the Hebrew El, and in the Canaanite Il. You'll notice that I put in parentheses Il for the Canaanite god, as this is how I have seen scholars of Ugaritic transliterate the god's name. I am not a scholar of Ugaritic. I am studying, I'm looking at it, but I am not a, scholar of it. Yet in this regard, I must trust the judgment of those scholars in regard to the Ugaritic. And so the reality is that it's very hard to determine the exact sounds of the gods' names in ancient Ugaritic, as the name is simply, excuse me, let me get some water. Oh, the phone's ringing. Okay, had to deal with the phone there. So, basically, let me show you a picture of the name of the Canaanite god El, which is simply represented by the character L in English. And here, let me pull this up. Here we have the Ugaritic Alphabet. It's coming up right now. Here we go. And this character here is the character for the letter L in English. And it looks like 3 staves in the Ugaritic. And so basically, when the scholars are transliterating the Ugaritic characters, they're looking at these symbols and they're replacing them with the transliterated English letters, as you'll see. Let me pull that up for you. Here we are. Now this is a actual text from Rosh Hashanah. This is the Rosh Hashanah 1.001 tablet, and here you can see the transliterated English letters of the Ugaritic text on the left side, and the right side is the transliterated English text. And then we have a translation into English below. And down here we have a pencil drawing of the photographic picture above. And so what we can do is pick out the name of the god Il, and you can see here the first line here. We see it ends with the name of their god for El, and it starts with a ewe is a noble offering, a dove is a noble offering, a ewe is a noble offering, kidneys and liver of a bull, and a ram for El. Now if we look, the other thing you need to know is that Ugaritic is read from from left to right, whereas Hebrew is read from right to left. Okay? So already we see a difference in the literature, the writing style. But if we're looking at the first 2 lines, I had to look at this for quite some time, and I finally found the staves for the god Il, which is located on the second line. Let me increase the magnification, which is located on the second line from the top, and it's located right here. Okay? And if you're looking up here at the picture, let me go back up here. You can see that it curves around the side of the clay tablet. And that's what they used to do when they were writing in the cuneiform and they began to run out of room. They would start to just wrap around the side of the tablet and actually just finish off the character on the side of the tablet. And that's what they did here, which is why you can see it here, because they're representing it with the pencil, or they've drawn it out for you. So this is the character for the Canaanite god Il, and you can see up here the representation of the name Il right there. And so let's move on. Let's go back to our presentation. So basically, what am I getting at here? Okay, when we look at the Hebrew name Elyon, okay, we notice that it's unique in the fact that it's not the same as the name Elohim. Instead of starting with the letter Aleph, as Elohim does, it starts with the letter Ayin. Now, perhaps this is minimal to some people, but there are different reasons for letters. We can only guess what they are. Both the Aleph and the Ayin have been described as silent letters, which take on the vowels needed per the context. But it has also been stated that the Aleph and the Ayin represent different guttural sounds blended with the vowel of context. So, for example, it has been stated that the name Elohim may have been pronounced Glochim, with the Aleph designating the guttural, G-L, or the Ayin. So here's a little website here that gets into the whole guttural sound, and then this is about Ugaritic and Hebrew, and you can see here where they talk about the GH or the G. So basically, it's saying that this particular word would have been pronounced Keser, and of course it starts with the Ayin, the Zion, and the Resh. So, and here it is in Ugaritic. But in Ugaritic it reads from left to right. Okay. So that's an interesting site that we probably will come back to. So basically my point about the different sounds of the names between the Canaanite and the Hebrew gods, some people saying, oh, it sounds the same. See, El in Hebrew, El in Canaanite, Ugaritic, LL. See, same God, right? Well, not really. Basically, my point about the sounds is that we can dismiss that claim rather easily because they both, because basically what has occurred is that modern scholars have transliterated the Canaanite name into English to sound similar to the transliterated Hebrew name or noun El. Okay? So the reality is that both languages had their own pronunciations. In Ugaritic it was probably Il. In Hebrew it could have been Gol. But these languages. Oh, there's the phone again. Hold on. Okay, I had to put the phone under a pillow. There's too many telemarketers calling. So the reality is that these languages, the pronunciations are lost to us through the sands of time. But we are gradually, as we study them, coming into a better understanding of how those languages are pronounced. So now that we have that little small bit of knowledge out of the way, it should be noted that names or words in different cultures can still be considered related even if they sound or are spelled differently. Now, this may be the case with the Canaanite god El or Il and the Hebrew god El or Elyon. But how does this prove that Elyon and Il are to be considered the same and that the Hebrew religion should be interpreted based upon the Canaanite culture? Well, I should also remind everyone, it should be noted that there remains a likely possibility that both the Canaanite and the Hebrew cultures received their Semitic words for God from an even earlier culture. In this scenario, Noah's 3 sons, from which the 3 tribes came, might have developed their own ideas about God Most High. These were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But we are only focused on the sons Ham and Shem, the Hamites from which the Canaanites sprung forth, and the Semites from which Israel sprung forth. Now, as a side note, the Canaanites, even though they genetically come from the Hamites, according to the Bible, are still categorized as a Semitic culture due to their language being of the Semitic type. The point is that if these cultures started originally from 2 brothers, then couldn't it be possible that their religious ideas contain similarities? Even if one does not accept the biblical account of Genesis chapter 10 as a historical reference, then surely one can admit to the possibility that the Canaanites and the Israelites shared a common origin. Isn't this a likely possibility rather than arguing over which culture stole their religion from the other? Well, seeing as how this idea is just too simple, I'm sure that most people would dismiss it. The fact that the Hebrew God and the Canaanite God are 2 different gods is quite apparent. The claim, of course, seems to dismiss the Hebrew God as a later development so that earlier Hebrews are essentially worshiping the Canaanite God as depicted in the Ugaritic religious texts. But this, of course, needs to be clarified. Basically, the Bible is the document under criticism and not the Ugaritic texts. The Rosh Hashanah tablets get a free pass by the scholars. And what is more, they consider the Ugaritic to be the correct depiction of the early Hebrew God. Well, not much can be said when dealing with unsubstantiated claims, but I'm doing my best. The fact that the Canaanite god El or Il and the Hebrew god Elyon are considered the highest in each culture can be viewed in the same way we use the genetic term God today. Each culture has different ideas about the characteristics of God, and even though their ideas about God are different, they may still call God by the same name or a similar name. But this does not mean that one culture evolved their ideas about God from another culture or vice versa. But it is entirely possible that both cultures sprang forth from an earlier culture and shared similar words and customs. It should also be pointed out that the Israelites fell away from their religion and worshipped other nations' gods at times. We see how this is illustrated in the Bible as what happened to the Israelites in their falling away from God in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 3. While Israel dwelt in Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, the same chapter that we are focusing in on in this series, in verses 15 through 18 it reads, "But Yeshurun," this is another name for Israel, "but Yeshurun waxed fat and kicked. You waxed fat, you grew thick, you became sleek. Then he forsook God who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominable practices they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons which were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come in of late, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that begot you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth." And even after this, later, when Joshua began to lead the Israelites, they continued to fall away. In Judges chapter 2, verse 11 through 13, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were round about them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth." So, basically, the biblical critic is not interested in these scriptures, as they are more inclined to believe that the Bible is just a tool of propaganda, and it's simply filled with the true nature of the Hebrew God in regard to the Israelites falling away. So basically, if you're not going to take into consideration the biblical answers regarding the nature of Israel's God, then it just makes sense why a person would believe any other outside speculative claims. Instead of accepting the Hebrew texts as they are, see them through the eyes, if you're going to see them through the eyes of a conspiracy, that it's all propaganda, instead of Israel falling away from the true God, the biblical critic will reinterpret the story as Israel going back to worship the real God of their fathers. And then basically the evil Jewish scribes are rewriting the biblical history in favor of the quote-unquote new Hebrew God. So basically they, of course, are minimalizing the text. They do not pay attention to all of the details of the biblical story. And for this reason, they are rightly named biblical minimalists. So how easy it must be for them to not have to consider all those pesky details of Scripture. A biblical minimalist can minimize whatever does not fit into their understanding of the various issues. But at some point, they end up explaining so much of the Bible away that their theories begin to crumble under the weight of their own words. Now, going back to Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, As usual, the critics are caught up in the various names of God, and they identify each name as a separate God. This, of course, is related to the similar approach in which the documentary Hypotheses employs the name Yahweh as the name in which the hypothetical Yahwist used in their theoretical rewriting of the Torah. Now, regarding the various names of God, this is a common occurrence not only in modern times, but in the ancient world as well. In various cultures and other religions, there are gods which are called by more than one name. But for some reason, the scholars have decided that this practice of calling God by more than one name does not apply in the case of the Hebrews. So when the critics read scriptures which call God by multiple names, they quickly dismiss them as synonyms, and instead they are quite convinced that Elyon, Most High God, and quote-unquote Yahweh are not the same God. For the critic, it's a very difficult thing for them to understand because it goes against their ideas about source theory and against what they believe is the true history of Israel. It's a very weak spot for them because they must admit that other religions call their gods by various names. But when it comes to Israel's God, they are blinded to this simple truth, and they only see what they believe is proof for various Hebrew gods. They see similarities in the Hebrew ideas of God and the Canaanite ideas of gods. Most consider the similar spelling of God's name enough to be convinced that the Hebrews developed their religion from the Canaanites. They quickly dismiss or do not even consider the possibility that the Hebrew concepts of God pre-existed in the Semitic lineage, and that it was the Canaanites who diverted from those pre-existing Semitic monotheistic ideas and developed their own ideas while retaining common Semitic origin. Again, this is speculation, but so is the Hebrew Canaanite borrowing theory. And it needs to be reiterated that this is a theory. A theory, the Bible seems to support the theory of a Canaanite diversion. But if you're a critic, you couldn't possibly espouse a theory that fits the biblical narrative. So, regarding the name Elyon, it would seem that there is at least one Canaanite text which appears to differentiate between the god Il and Elyon. And that's here. And we'll get into that. I need to study this a little more. Basically, this is the inscription. Dates to about 750 BC. List major patron deities of each side, all of them in pairs, coupled by and. And then you can see here the Ugaritic transliterated Il. There it is. Il and Elyon. Okay. That possibly means El and Elyon. seemingly also two separate gods, followed by further pairs of deities. It is possible that they indicate two aspects of the same God, or might be a single divine name. The Ugaritic Text contains divine names like Quathar and Cassis, or skillful, which means skillful and clever, or Mat and Shar, which means death and prince, or possibly death and destruction, and Nikal and Ib, which is the origin of the name of the Sumerian goddess named Ningal, combined with an element of unknown meaning. Therefore, El Wa Elyon might be a single name for God and highest, identical in meaning with the biblical El Elyon. So this is a little bit of speculation here. Here's the link on Wikipedia. So that's an interesting little note there. But I'm going to end off the video here, and we're going to be continuing on 2.2 of the name El and Elyon and Yahweh, and be delving into this deeper. God bless everyone. Keep seeking truth.